Visual streaming on YouTube, and we also have a link for a Zoom webinar. The link can be found by going to our website, going to the Select Board, and going to Select Board Packets, and there's a link on our agenda there to join. We have the same rules and regulations for a person in attendance as on Zoom. You can certainly raise your hand and make a comment during the meeting. You can ask a question. If we can get to it, we'll try to answer them. Don't guarantee that. Do not use chat. We're not monitoring that. And again, it's preferred if you just raise your hand if you'd like to comment on an agenda item. With that, we will commence into our agenda and start the meeting with any comments from the public on non-agenda items. Does anybody from the public have not? Mr. Lindquist raised his hand first. Sorry, Ray, you're a little slow there. We'll get to you.
Good evening. Name is Peter Lindquist. Can everybody hear me okay?
Your microphone is off.
Okay.
Now.
There we go.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
I live on Chestnut Street. I am here to make a list of requests, or at least reminders to our select board members and our town manager of situations of safety and health that exist in town and have been not terrifically responded to. I'm just going to go down through the list. Mr. Fulciani, I asked you for a copy of the interim manager's contract. Have yet to see that for the Midcoast Solid Waste.
This meeting has nothing to do with.
Of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't.
So
that,
we'll deal with that separately.
Oh, that's great. Okay. On top of that, I'd like to ask, while we're here, copies of contracts. I'd like a copy of Audra's contract. Do you think you can provide me with that?
I don't believe we would give out any personnel information to the public.
A contract for employment that is signed?
Okay.
Thank you. That's great. I appreciate it. Now on to number 2. The safety situation up at the Ragged Mountain Recreation Area. At least 3 years ago, I brought up and sent emails and photos of the situation of the patrol shack, which has no stairway, and it asks employees and volunteers to walk up a precarious rock and ice covered ledge. I did get a response from our town manager, and she tried to tell me that it was more of the responsibility of the volunteers, the ski patrol. I disagree with that. I think it is a town facility. We insure it, and we ask employees and volunteers to work there. So I think we've got a very serious situation, and I'd be glad to send those photos to you all again if you'd like. Bob, you ask me for evidence. You say, Peter, show me the evidence. So if you need that, I can get that to you. Here's another example of evidence of safety and it just health. We have employees in town that work for our town that smoke cigarettes on the job while they're working. I find that, I'm sure it's in their policy manual, it's against the rules. It's happening. We pay for insurance. I think it needs to be addressed. Can't seem to get, help on this. I've asked our town manager about a safety and health program, the similar one that is done in Rockport. I believe it's called SHAPE. And we do a better job on our own. Okay. Safety and health over again at the Ragged Mountain Recreation Area. The town of Camden is a landlord to a small business over there. And they pay thousands of dollars a month to rent a trailer that is rotten, has rotten floorboards and moldy and crappy interior. Now again, from a health and safety standpoint, a landlord shouldn't be asking a paying tenant to put up with unhealthy situations. So it's been brought up before and it's ignored. So what do? Do we call our health department to come in and inspect a piece of property that we should be taking care of for this tenant who we're trying to support? I brought this up at the budget committee meeting, and I brought this up during our a select board campaign, and I was summarily ignored. So I guess I have to just bring it up at a town meeting like tonight. So thank you. Mm-hmm. I've asked, again, in budget committee meetings and in meetings with department heads, what is the strategic plan of the Ragged Mountains Recreation Area? I was told, oh, Peter, we'll get that to you. Never saw anything. I've told, Audra got up a couple of months ago and said that a grant had fallen through. Okay, what was this a grant in relation to, and how did it fit with our strategic plan? I don't understand what's changed, what hasn't changed, and what is the plan at this moment. Mm-hmm. And we don't see it publicized. Mm-hmm. We don't issue a newsletter mm-hmm. that the residents could read. And then last but not least, again, I brought this up 3 times, and you'll remember this, Bob, and to our code enforcement officer, this town does not have a clear-cutting ordinance. You're allowed to clear-cut wherever you want in town, many acres as you want. The state of Maine has a clear-cutting ordinance, and I thought we were interested in erosion control and environmental impact and all sorts of stuff. But I brought it up time and time again, and I was told, no, we're too busy, we got other priorities. And it's really kind of sad because the town of Camden was there was the violator of one clear-cutting incident up in front of Hosmer Pond, but there was another one right across the street. And if we had an ordinance, it would have stopped or at least brought up a discussion. Right now, you can still go out and clear-cut. And I sent you an article, or it was a piece of property for sale. It was 87 some odd acres. Mm-hmm. Somebody could have bought that in Camden and clear cut it. That's, I have to bring this up because I don't get a lot of phone calls or emails. I don't know why.
Okay. Thank you, Peter.
Yep.
Good to see you. And now Ray.
Just one page this time. Ray Andresen, Camden resident. I'm a member of the Save the Montgomery Dam Committee, and we had 500 voters of the town of Camden who signed our petition to place our warrant article before the town for approval. We are obligated to those 500 people who signed our petition and to other citizens who want to save the dam. And that is why we are holding a special town meeting on September 27th to present our warrant article to the town. We seek the town to help in this regard, including having the registrar of voters there, free use of the Opera House on this date, a constable to post notice, and any other participation the town normally has for a special town meeting. In the alternative, we seek the Board of Selectmen to place our article before the voters at the November election, and we seek the Selectmen to decide this issue at their next Selectmen meeting. The November election would assure greater participation by the public because elderly voters and all other voters could have all day long to vote, and they could even vote by mail. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you very much. Other comments from the public on non-agenda item? Not seeing any, we'll move on to our second item, which is the discussion and approval of the board minutes from July 6th, 2022. Does the board have any comments on the meeting minutes that are in the packet? Not hearing any, kind of a motion to accept, please?
Second. Motion
made and seconded. Any discussion? No. All's in favor? 5-0. Thank you very much. We have 3 items on the public hearing, and I'm going to go over the regulations because there may be somebody here that wants to speak to any one of the 3. The purpose of the public hearing is to allow the public to provide input to the select board on any matter being deliberated by the board. I would ask that anybody in the public would like to speak to identify themselves and please address the issue for, against, or just speak to it. Please be courteous, timely, and when I get through all the public who wishes to comment, I will close the public hearing and revert to a select board deliberation. There will be no more discussion with the public at that point unless a board member has a question of anyone who was previously spoken from the public. So with that, the first item we have on the agenda for public hearing is the Camden Code Adoption Ordinance. My screen just went blank, which is basically a digitization of our town codes and ordinances using general code program. I'm not sure if anybody from the public would like to comment to that item. If you're not seeing any, I will close the public on that and revert to select board. Audra, do you want to give a 2-second?
Yes, so
This is actually something that's long overdue. It's not just digitizing the code, it's also condensing it into a code of ordinances instead of having a bunch of, loose ordinances that we, try our best to, manage and keep updated and everything else that we need to do to make sure that, we're displaying the most recent copy to the public. In the charter, before it was amended in 2021, this was required, but it was something that just never got done for whatever reason. A lot of municipalities in Maine have codes of ordinances instead of, a variety of loose ordinances. So, the adoption of the new charter as well as the digitization process really gave us a good opportunity to make sure that we didn't let this charter provision slip through the cracks again.
Okay. Board, do you have any questions, discussion on this matter? Allison, go ahead.
So what exactly are we approving the format? Are we approving the idea I would think is that there aren't any changes. It's changing a format and the way that it's accessed, but not any of the words, or?
Right, so there are a few things that were cleaned up, like there were a few redundancies that are sort of pointed out in the memo that Janice put in your packets.
Yeah.
Ordinances that when they were originally passed, there was no statute that was, sort of prevailing at the time. And, things have changed where some of them are redundant now because there's a state statute that addresses it. So, it also gave us the opportunity to go through and do a little bit of cleanup. But you're right, Allison, there's nothing, substantive in policy level that's been changed. It's more of, formatting and condensing and indexing so that everything's more easy to find than, when we had them in separate ordinances and we had them as subsections or chapters within that.
So
Well, let's talk what you finished.
It's fine.
sort of a follow-up on that, like a not a rebuttal, but so I guess what, there were first of all, I would have liked to be able to see it in the digital form online because it's hard to, since the entire purpose is to make it easier for people to find things, it's really hard to evaluate that in this format. But there were a couple things that just, obviously I haven't memorized exactly the way it was before, but there were a couple of things that jumped out at me, just having remembered like annotations from the past. It might seem really minor, but like in the parking ordinance, there was something about the speed limit being changed on Mullineau Road, for instance. And I had just been looking at this, and in the old version, the annotation said something to the effect of, changed by select board, something, 2003. Now the annotation is changed or updated 2003. And in an ordinance that is already really hard to understand who has the authority to do what and the history of things, and I really don't want to lose any of those little annotations. I think the whole thing probably needs to be repealed and replaced, the parking ordinance, but since we do have it, I'm nervous that there might be a bunch of other things like that I haven't had a chance to really dissect. And that I was sort of assuming that it was going to be like it was going to be complete, and there wasn't going to be a risk of losing anything.
So what we could do is just, move forward with this tonight so that we can move forward with the digitization process. And I think that would make it easier for you to all go back through it when it's at that point. And if there's anything like that sort of jumps out at us,
We can bring it back and fix
you
it.
have the ability to change it again, because the way that you're given authority in the charter, it's not something, this isn't, an ordinance that needs to go back to voters for approval.
Right,
This is
right.
something that the select board
If there's-
has authority over.
If there's a lot of annotations that we're missing, we can, worst case, we could bring it to a workshop and work on it.
I just want to feel good about the end result of how it's organized, and that we're like, yes, this accomplishes what we wanted to. So if we could get another chance to look at it once it's digitized, that would be great. And I'm really happy. Thank you I know this is a huge
Yeah.
undertaking.
Janice, this
I mean,
Thanks, Janice.
all of those separate documents. It's-
My question was going to be, could you give us an example of conflicts, redundancies, and inconsistencies? But I think those will be apparent when we see the
Yes, and also
digitized version in comparison.
one in Janice's memo, it had to do with fishing.
Sure, yeah, 1936.
Yeah.
I like that stuff.
I think that was probably one that jumped out, and it's stuck in my mind, but I think, there are a few others that are probably going to come up. And the fact that it's going to be easier to read now that it's digitized, we're going to find many, many
Yeah,
more.
I think as I understand it, we're required to approve this digitization filing system. That's what it is, not that everything in there is correct to date.
Right. Right. I mean,
Are you sure?
the idea is that it's as close to what the voters passed as possible.
Right.
But like we said, things change, and, Janice does an excellent job of keeping track of the record. But there are things that, I think that we'll all look at and see that
Right.
need to be updated a little bit.
And so what would that process be if we
So I
see
think
things?
And also I think, I don't want you to feel pressured to pass this either, because we do need to have a hard copy available to the public. And this is the hard copy that will be available to the public. So it still is really important that you're all comfortable with this version. But I think that when we get the electronic version, and if you want to see now kind of what it looks like, I know the city of Belfast uses the same, they use the same
Right.
software. That'll just give you an idea of what it'll look like to search through and how everything's laid out. But we could, like Bob said, either have a workshop to sort of go through it, or, depending on how able you're all are to look at it on your own, we could do it at a meeting.
Yeah, what I want to say, we could approve the digitization part, but the proviso that you'll get us the electronic version, and then by some date certain after that, we have to provide comments to close it out.
Correct, yes. And if you notice anything that you didn't notice in the hard copy and the digital version, we'll be able to make changes to both.
When will the digital version be ready for us to start that review? Do you have any idea?
That's a Janice question.
Janice?
Your main purpose tonight is just to adopt the code ordinance.
That's,
The digitization will come after.
okay.
Right.
So once,
That we can actually do it.
so we'll just approve the code ordinance, and then we will, when it comes out, we'll make a decision on when comments are due back. How's that?
That has code ordinance.
Okay, okay.
I move to pass
Yeah,
this.
go ahead, Sylvie. You need my mic.
Yes, I need your mic. Are we also thinking about digitizing the forms and automating the forms since we're looking into that? And if we're digitizing the forms, I know there's a couple of forms that Alison and I have been wanting to revise because some questions are completely obsolete and inappropriate. So do we need to have, schedule a workshop for this and just have an entire, admin ordinance forms day? I know it's super exciting, right?
I think
But
that
can we do
will
that?
happen.
We can make that decision later.
Yeah, and that's all going to be through the, sorry,
Those will be separate ordinances sorted out, but.
Oh, no,
I'm getting the programs mixed up in my head, the iWork system.
So we're
Able to
really looking for a
digitize
motion to
forms.
approve the Camden Code Adoption Ordinance tonight.
So
And-
moved.
And a second, anybody?
So I just don't like what does Camden, T mean at the top of?
Again, we're just approving the
But I thought
ordinance,
we
not
were-
the content. We're going to get a
But this is
digitized.
this is the paper copy. So we still want that to be under, I'm just trying to understand when the appropriate time is to,
When we get the electronic version.
I know, but there's going to be a non-electronic version too. And are we saying that this is all just, is this the last opportunity to comment on?
No, we'll have to change both. Like if there's anything that you notice in the digital version, it'll have to be changed in the paper copy.
Okay.
This is the process we're approving right now.
That's all. Just the digitization through the Camden, what have we called it? Camden Code Adoption Ordinance. And I have a-
Yeah, you're basically
Second, okay.
creating the code of ordinances instead of
Second,
having a bunch
Sophie.
of separate.
So I'm seconding.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Further discussion? Not hearing any. All those in favor? 5-0. Thank you. The second item on the public hearing is with respect to the Whitehall and at 52 High Street for the renewal of a Class 1 hotel liquor license. Does anyone here from the public want to speak to this application? Not seeing anyone, I'll close the public hearing and revert to deliberation by the select board for this liquor license. And you have a motion to
Make a motion to approve is it the victualler?
No,
Liquor license
it's
for
Class
Whitehall.
1 liquor
Class
license.
1 liquor license for Whitehall.
Yeah, okay.
I need to
That's what you need. Do I have a second? Do I hear a second? Tom, thank you. Thank you, Tom. And with that, any further discussion? All those in favor? 5-0. Lastly, we have an application from Lucky Betty's at 46 Elm Street for the renewal of a Class A lounge liquor license. Somebody from the public here that'd like to speak to this one? Just say hi. Just say hi if you'd like. It's up to you. Hi.
Come to the mic and tell us. Go back to work.
Oh.
Come to the mic and tell us about Lucky Betty and.
Well, I don't think you have to. It's so popular.
but she
that you have to.
should.
Popular, but still, you know.
In my work clothes. I had to go fix a leak.
Did you get the water out?
Yeah, I got the water out, but that's why I'm still in this. I don't know. We've just been open
Introduce
for almost
yourself,
a year.
that's all. Just
David Dupree, Lucky Betty's.
And I can tell you, you're doing a great job. That place is so popular.
Thank you.
But sometimes wish it was open more nights. I know, eventually.
Doing as much
Yeah.
as I can.
Yes, good job.
Good job, yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Not a problem. With that, I'll close the public comments and revert to the decision by the select board regarding the
So make a motion that we approve Lucky Betty's renewal of a Class A lounge liquor license.
second by Tom. Thank you. Discussion? All those in favor? You got it.
Thank
Go
you.
back to work.
But thanks for showing up.
Good to see you again.
No, but we like it. It's really nice when you do it.
We appreciate it.
We appreciate it.
Thank you. You're welcome. On the consent agenda, we have two major items. One is the list of victuals license, which are the Birchwood, Camden, Cuzzies, Lucky Betty's, Oyster River Wine Growers, Timber Cliff Cottages, Uncle Willie's Candy Shop, and Zoot Coffee. The second item on the consent agenda is to appoint, as we do annually, Parker S. Lake Jr. to the Pascal Fund Trust. Are there any objections to the items on the consent agenda? Not hearing any or seeing any, that they are hereby adopted. Going to our action items, we have the first one is an amendment to the Camden Police Department Collective Bargaining Agreement. Audra, could you give a brief intro here? That might be helpful.
So I had to call Randy and ask him about this, and from what I understand, this is again stuff that happened while I was gone.
Did I bring Randy on? Or?
Actually, yeah, that's
Please.
probably better.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you.
From the horse's mouth instead
Okay.
of
Thank
secondhand
you.
for me.
Yes.
It's like separation of church.
Fun to speculate while not letting him in and just make him sweat it out.
Raise your hand.
Exactly. Get stressed out when I say the wrong thing.
There he is.
Good evening.
Hello, Randy. As you know, we're discussing the amendment, I guess it is, to the bargaining agreement. Could you please describe it and what generated and how we got here?
When we went through contract negotiations, we were also simultaneously doing a personnel policy update, and bonus vacations was part of that discussion in the personnel policy. However, it wasn't done when we were in contract negotiations, and all we want to do is bring the contract vacations in compliance with the personnel policy. And that's bonus vacations for milestone anniversaries 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50, which the town employees all get right now, including myself and my lieutenant. And we would just like to recognize our department employees who also have reached those milestones. Because as you know, finding help is quite hard, and when we have people that are staying with us for a number of years, I think they ought to get that as well.
Mm-hmm. Questions, board? Allison?
I feel like, I recognize that anybody under the union contract would see that there's something that the non-union employees are getting and want that too, but I think generally there's a reason why, it is very typical for there to be things that are different between a union contract and a personnel policy and sort of the benefit of. So I wouldn't automatically think that just because there are benefits to being in a union and there are benefits probably to not being in a union, and I don't know, I'm generally.
Historically, things that aren't addressed in the contract fall back to the personnel policy. And we would have negotiated, or the union would have negotiated that, but it was still in the process in the personnel policy at that time. That's why it didn't come up in negotiations.
I guess there are benefits that members of the police union have that town employees don't have. For instance, there's nothing in the personnel policy that says we can't give a lie detector test, or there are things that the police union put in there that regular town employees aren't entitled to. So I guess I see them as different. It's not that I have any issue with giving people more benefits. I can recognize the value of that, but it feels like it was a separate conversation, and I don't know.
Other comments? Go ahead, Stephanie. Randy, did you want to respond to that, Randy, or I was going to get other questions?
I'm making the recommendation. It's up to you to decide if that's the way you want to go or not.
Stephanie?
So for full disclosure, I was the chair of the Personnel Committee when this was recommended to the board back in 2020, 2021. So I am in full agreement that this is a necessary step to offer things that compensate more than just money. In the world we live in right now, police, fire, EMS, any sort of public service, people like that are under so much stress that to choose to go into that profession is, I would think, a pretty scary situation. Mm-hmm. And I think that this anniversary extra week that's offered to the town employees is necessary for our police department as well.
Thank you.
Tom.
So this contract, I wasn't obviously a part of the board at the time. This contract was approved July 1st through 2022 through June 30, 2025. And at the time that this contract was negotiated and approved was the additional vacation time, which I believe is what we're voting on tonight. Was that discussed in any way or brought to anybody's attention that this was something that would be or could be coming forward in the, a month later or a few weeks later?
Well, we didn't have a timeline, Tom, on when that was going to be approved through the personnel policy. So at that point, it wasn't approved. So
the personnel policy wasn't approved until.
And what it is, it's a longevity appreciation, basically, is what it is for our officers who, make that milestone. It's the 10, the 20s, the 30s. Right. We don't have anybody that's got 40 yet, but I'm holding out that I'm going to make it. But we'll see.
The personnel
Can I also
policy.
make one more?
I personally think it's a goodwill gesture to our officers to show them that they are appreciated for making those extra years.
Milestones, what do you have to get to?
Just for the record, the personnel policy was approved by the board in May, I believe. Even though Stephanie's right, it was drafted back in 21,
Correct.
I believe, but it was on a shelf
And
for
COVID.
way too long a time period and was finally approved at that point. So it was very late in the process, and that's what Randy's referring to. Go ahead, Steph. I'm sorry.
It was before.
Yes, you can have the mic.
Thank you.
So my question is, when we approved the union bargaining agreement between the police and the union last time it came to the board, we could not look into specific provisions. Right, we were asked to either approve or reject the contract. So I'm not understanding why we are asked to approve this addition, given that we had no say on the whole contract. So I'm asking a procedural point, I guess, that why is this coming to the board? Because if it's approved between the police chief and the union and becomes part of the police bargaining agreement, then we don't have a say, or the select board should not be approving or disapproving. I'm just trying to understand the difference here in the process.
That is an interesting.
Stephanie, you wanted to go first. Go ahead. You had a hand up.
Yes, so I just wanted to make the point that in the personnel policy, I may not be saying that well, but how vacations are taken it's very well laid out. And in my knowledge of how everybody negotiates, how that happens in the town, it's talked about and everybody's coverage is taken into account pretty strongly. So offering this extra is an only positive thing in my.
Randy, isn't this, you said earlier that normally you follow the personnel policy of the town without having to go to special wording to that effect? Is that what I heard?
If we have something that isn't addressed in the contract, then we have reverted, very rarely, but we have reverted back to what the personnel policy says.
Yeah, it's from that perspective, I see this as more of a recognition of the town that the police department is recognizing that part of the personnel policy without really having to change the bargaining agreement.
Well, I think the bargaining agreement spells out vacation.
Right.
And so you have to change it. That was part of the agreement, and it's going to have to be changed.
Then if
We're able to do side agreements with the town on
that's what I thought.
things that come up during the contract years, if there's something that needs to be amended.
That's the way this is one modest, positive change. So I agree with you, Stephanie. Because, in the end of the day, the result of the people across the aisle in the fire department are getting these benefits. So I have a problem with not figuring out a way for the police department to have those benefits. Mr. Tom, next.
Thank you. Randy, you mentioned that retention is an issue. Could you expand on that a little bit? I'm struggling with maybe, a 10-year, 1-week vacation being a significant factor in retention.
Retention is an issue nationwide in every police department. And part of the problem we have for retention is many departments are offering extremely high sign-on bonuses, better schedules. It's pretty much officers can shop wherever they want. If you go to some departments, you could pick up a $20,000 sign-on bonus, work there 2 years, get your $20,000, then move on to the next one that's giving a $20,000 bonus. We've been fortunate. Our staff has stayed pretty steady. The bottom positions usually turn over. I still have one open position, and we just haven't found the right person to fill that at this point. But, yeah. We can't compete with sheriff's departments, Tom. They give them a car the first day that they go to work. They are assigned a vehicle. And, if you don't keep the wages up and you don't stay competitive,
Right.
The days of people coming to work for a municipality and staying there their whole career are very rare because there's so much opportunity out there.
Randy, I very briefly looked at the bargaining agreement. There's certain things that the town is required to do and certain rights that the police officers have and that sort of thing. Is there any minimum requirement when you hire an officer? Do you make them sign a contract or anything like that?
No, we don't sign employment contracts with them. Quite honestly, I can't tell you if we could make them sign a contract to come to work here. But the state has put in place, if we send an officer to the police academy, if they leave the department within 5 years, there's a prorated fee that the agency who hires them has to pay us for reimbursement. And it's first year out is $40,000, then it decreases like $8,000 or $9,000 per year till the year 5 is up. So that's hard. Officers with 1 year experience want to go somewhere else. You've got departments that have got to pay out $40,000 to the sponsoring agency that hired them and put them through the academy for reimbursement. Some departments are paying it just to get people to fill their ranks.
Allison.
So I absolutely want the town to be extremely competitive and an attractive place to work, and I can absolutely recognize the benefit of doing that, and I would hope that every time we do these contracts, we're thinking about that. What concerned me about the bonus vacation for in the personnel policy as well, and that was something that I didn't dwell on or necessarily fully understand reading over all those different things. You know, we each look at different elements of it, and so it was sort of after the fact that it, you know, the first milestone is 10 years. Is that right? And so you get an extra week at 10 years.
Yep.
And then if you've been here for 20 years, you get an extra 2 weeks.
Yep.
People who've been here for 30 years get it. So this first time, it was, you know, it's all of a sudden people are getting, you know, for some of these long-term employees long-term employees already get quite a lot of vacation comparatively with some jobs. And so then adding that on is a little bit of a hit potentially to the town, and I'm sure the town manager can sort all that out and make sure that it doesn't impact, that we don't have too many shortages. But it does feel like there are a lot of efforts that are made to retain the people who have been here for longer, and I'm supportive of that. But you know, one of the things that came up in the personnel policy was that we still hadn't addressed the fact that that new people that are newly hired don't get any benefits until, or don't get any vacation time until after being here for a year. And we brought that up during the meeting, and that was addressed. But it kind of made me feel like, well, what is the process for soliciting input also from all of the employees? Generally speaking, the ones who have been here for a really long time kind of know how to advocate for themselves, but the people who have been here for less time don't necessarily know how, you know, I talked to plenty of people that didn't know that the personnel policy was up for discussion. It had been recommended by the personnel board in 2020 or something, and then not rediscussed. So I guess I would like to see us also really making a concerted effort to be super competitive for the new people too. Because 10 years is a long time to stay stay somewhere
but
already.
Fundamentally, though, we're dealing with someone stop. I would share some of the comments you made about my own hindsight on looking at this benefit, but it is, in fact, has been approved by the select board. It's right now, it is what it is. What we're discussing here tonight is whether or not that should cover all the cross-section of employees of our town. And in this case, because it's a union agreement, that's simply what it is. I agree, Tom, also. I think, you know, the employees, you probably know this as well as anybody, trying to keep them around for 10, 20 years ain't so simple sometimes. And it may not be as big an incentive, but the bottom line, it does no harm as far as trying to keep as an incentive I'm talking about,
right,
whether I like it or not, but it is a fact. Audra?
I could offer a suggestion.
Sure.
So that, you know, you're allowing the police department to have the same benefit as everyone else, but you're not opening up the CBA again, because I can understand why you wouldn't want to do that. I have a little bit of discomfort with it, just because it's, you know, it's kind of like.
We're looking, that would be a side agreement is what we're looking for, not to open everything back up.
Right. Well, I'm saying, like, if we could specifically address it in the personnel policy, to make it very clear that it applies to the police officers.
That's, I would totally agree with you.
And so, and then when we come around 3 years to do the CBA again, if they feel very strongly that language needs to be included in the CBA, we can
That's in
do
3
it then.
years, so that's.
When is the next time the personnel policy will be?
We can do that
Triggers that.
whenever.
There's no limit. You can do it next
Personnel
year.
board, though, the current elected officials have to term out, and then the select board will assign people onto that board going forward. So it would be up to that chairperson to make a meeting.
And is it triggered by the town
Different now
manager?
because it was sort of swept up in the charter changes. So
Yes.
it's a committee now.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so you know, the board will need to decide how you want to,
It can
you
be
know, appoint
reformed.
people and what you want to charge that committee with, because it's advisory. And so the select board will be sort of the final word on, changes to the personnel policy
can
that
be
get approved.
reformed.
People have to term out first.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
When will that happen?
One more question. Go ahead, Sophie.
2 years.
Randy, I'm just assuming that we've looked at the budget implication of the change in the policy?
I can make it work. I don't have
And
an
make it
issue
work,
with
you don't need more money?
Yeah, our officers are good at covering shifts, and if we need to slide some people to cover that, to give those employees that benefit, I'm not worried about it at all.
Thank you.
So what we're looking at then would be a modification to the personnel policy to incorporate, rather than hitting the CBA. That sounds like a logical approach to me.
How does that work, though, if the collective bargaining agreement actually has language that specifically says something, and then we have another document that contradicts it?
I don't think it's contradiction. I think it's elaboration. It's supplemental. It's not contradicting.
It doesn't take away any rights, it increases.
It's adding.
So just like in addition to those things mentioned in the.
Right.
Motion to approve Randy's recommendation of adding the bonus vacation service benefit
To the personnel policy.
to the personnel policy.
I just have one more.
Let's wait till we get a second.
We're not in discussion yet? I'm sorry. Oh,
That's okay,
sorry.
Tom.
I thought we were approving.
Not a
I
problem.
apologize. I understand the feeling. Like, 1 week at 10 years isn't necessarily going to motivate a 2-year employee to stay on for another 8. But it is the feeling of being appreciated and maybe seeing a colleague earn that week.
Yeah.
And I can understand that, and I appreciate that. I do have a little bit of a heartburn with opening a settled contract.
We're not.
Opening it.
We're not.
I understand, but this was an independent. So the police, I understand, negotiate their contract a little bit differently than the other town departments.
Oh, yeah.
So
It's unionized.
correct. So it's a 3-year contract,
Right.
and that contract's good for 3 years, and then they have another opportunity to negotiate it in 2025. Correct.
Correct.
I think that's the more appropriate time for this. I just do. I think that, I sign contracts every week, and that's how contracts go.
Yeah, I believe it's a fairness situation where, people across the aisle are getting this benefit if they are around long enough. I'm not in love with the 10-year, 20-year, 30-year thing either as I look back on it, but it is approved. It's in the personnel policy. And we can work to change that later, which would affect the police department also, because it's in a separate agreement, not in the collective bargaining agreement. If we decided to change at some point in time that issue in the personnel policy, it would change the police department too.
Oh, so it could be taken away at any time?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Could
I
it?
also think that's
you approve the personnel policy
That's in
now.
our power.
So
to do
that would be the difference here, is that we're not locking ourselves, not that I'm saying we're going to change it, because we're not going to, but philosophically,
We could.
we could take that
That's true.
away without it, we're not locked in for
That's
3
right. That's
years,
the-
and so.
That's the advantage of doing it this way, Tom, is to going through the personnel policy rather than trying to change an agreement, a union agreement.
And if it comes up in 2025, I would support it, I think.
Oh, Again, anyway.
I do think it would be I agree wholeheartedly with Tom, although I don't want to, sticking to that, like, high-headedness of it. I think the implications might be that it's too demoralizing for people who are comparing. It would be like a slap in the face, and I don't want to do that. But I do think that the other town employees, by being part of that personnel policy, they have to go through that excruciating up and down every year of figuring, what is the budget committee going to say about the COLA?
Yeah.
What is this? What is that? And it's this, like, every year kind of on trial, wondering what's going to happen, whereas the police department, by having that union is insulated from that up and down. So I think it's
Good, we
important
can
to
send
recognize
him
that
over to the police department and fill that department up, so
Yeah,
Randy
right,
doesn't
right.
have to go looking.
I think we're down to a point where we're amending a document that can be re-amended if we want to, including the whole issue of the 10, 20, 30 year. I think it's simple, it's straightforward, and we have a motion and a second. I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor?
Can you tell me one more time what we're voting on?
Okay, absolutely, Tom. The motion is to, in the personnel policy, where we talk about this 10, 20, 30, to include the police department in that document. That's what we're voting on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor again? 5-0. Thank you. A good discussion, by the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much, and I speak on behalf of all the officers of the police department. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Randy. Take care. The next item is a minor, well, not minor, it's amendment to the parking traffic regulations.
Stay there.
Stay there. To add parking meter fine citations as a temporary measure for 1 year. Obviously, as it says, this is for the paid parking pilot program at on the public landing. And I guess the bottom line here is we modified parking fines for street parking when your tire's been marked and all that kind of thing, but we didn't cover parking meter specifically as a fine. Is that correct?
Bob?
Yes.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Don't get hung up on the meter, because I think that's referring to the kiosk, because that actually is a meter. We're not putting individual meters down there. What that's going to be is a fine if somebody's at an expired meter. And that was recommended by John Burke, and the fine amount is consistent with up and down the coast for that violation.
And that was also recommended by the advisory committee on the parking study.
Yeah.
We discussed it, we're waiting for the wording.
Okay.
I make a motion that we approve the experimental amendment to parking ordinance, part 4 of the Camden Police Ordinance.
Is it experimental or temporary, just out of
It's
curiosity?
experimental, but it's also temporary.
Since
It means that we don't have to change the whole code.
Yeah,
For 1 year, we can do experiments.
Okay.
We can either renew it for 1 year or.
I thought it was
change
2
the
years.
Written as experiment.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have a second?
I'll second. for
Thank you,
discussion.
Stephanie. Further discussion? Oh, Stephanie.
I just, this fine, so it's a 3-hour parking. And so does that mean the $30? So when I park illegally on the street, and I'm sorry, I don't anymore because I work from home, Randy, so you probably have, you probably can't go buy extra stuff because of my fines. But when I did, it was every hour. I mean, I only got one because people would tell me. But how would this work? How would this? Is it every 3 hours they would get another $30 fine, or is it every hour? How would it work? I don't know.
If you stay longer than the 3 hours, and you're an expired meter, that's what that fine is.
Okay, so if they stay 9 hours, they park in the morning and they leave they only get a $30 fine?
Well, they're going to have to pay the initial, and if they don't do that, this is a deterrent for people to try to figure this out of parking at expired meters to get time. So when the officer is going to make his rounds, we have the option of the overtime parking, which is there, I believe. I got to do a little more research on that, but we also have, it's going to be that person who stays the 4th or 5th hour. It'll be a straight $30 fine.
Tom, go ahead.
Thank you. So historically, we've had 2-hour parking, correct, Randy?
Yes.
Okay. And in the past, if somebody went over 2 hours, how much was the fine?
$10.
$10. So we're upping the amount. And if did that basically give them a permit to park? Along the lines of Stephanie's question, like at what point did you continue to fine them every hour? Or?
They would be every round, so every 2 hours they'd pick up another ticket. And it increased in the fine. We've gone to
in magnitude,
20, 40, 50.
And could you just clarify to me one more time how this differs from that? So it'll be a $30 fine for over 3 hours, and again, every 3 hours?
It's going to be a $30 fine if you are at an expired meter, straight up, because we're doing 10 hours a day times 2 is 20, so the fine is actually higher than what it would cost to park there all day. I think that's how John has figured that out.
Thank you for that math. I was trying, Randy.
And now, just so we are clear, the public landing is the only place that's going to have 3-hour parking. On the streets is still going to be free 2-hour parking. If you park longer than 2, then you're subject to a ticket on the streets.
Right.
And if you stay there longer than that, then you're subject to increased fines every round that the officer goes through.
So in essence, what we're having is we have two competing finding systems, because we still have, imagine like an analog system on the street with an officer walking and a chalk mark, but then we have the kiosk and the digital process with those kiosks at the public landing. So that's why we need to have that. That's why we need to have that specific ordinance to make sure that we actually give them
We don't have a
tickets.
violation for that
Exactly,
right now.
that we give them tickets that are legal. So that's what we're doing.
We did already change. Were you guys here when we changed the fees?
We changed the fees, yeah. No, I
For the
think
regular tickets?
They weren't there yet.
So we did that. So those tickets for regular street parking
Yeah.
have already gone up
Right.
to the same, I think it's
Those
the
are now
same.
20, 40, 50.
20, 40, 50, we upped them $10.
That was approved in late May, or early June.
Yeah.
Because so many people, when they found out the ticket was $10, they were like happy to pay that.
Right. It's not a heck of a lot.
Oh, yeah.
We have a motion and a second to accept this modification to this temporary measure. Any further discussion?
Yes, Alison.
Allison?
So I know that, I'm sure this was discussed a lot by the committee, and I watched some of those meetings, but not all of them. The big thing that concerned me was seeing that 3-hour limit, because considering the number of day sailor guests.
Yep.
I mean, that to me, you're already paying, $50 a ticket to go out on a day sailor. A lot of those people are going to choose to, I assume, to park down there when they couldn't before. And at least, so to me, the idea was like we're increasing turnover and allowing more people to come into town and leave. The day sailors already had a system where they were getting people in other places. And now it feels like we are turning that into just a day sailor lot. I mean, I'm sure that's just going to be something that, are we going to monitor that? And sure. I spend probably like 4 or 5 hours on the public landing every day.
So you're going to monitor it?
Yeah.
No, I think one of the,
so I just, it's going to change who, the group that can be.
I think the whole thing with this is, we're not debating the details of the system tonight. We're talking about a fine to be added for a kiosk violation. Now, whether it should be 3 or 2,
Yeah.
So, this happened in Belfast too. It wasn't the only location. So when they mine aggregate to make the asphalt,
Yep.
they can hit an iron pocket.
Yep.
And it ends up being in the aggregate. It doesn't change the integrity of the pavement, but it makes it ugly.
Yep.
And you can ask the town manager. I was just, if anybody's upset about it, it's me, because I hate that stuff. I'm very particular.
I actually appreciate that, because I wasn't even involved with anything on the select board when that happened, and people were emailing me if I knew why.
It drives me crazy. I tried everything I could to get the guy to redo it, but all I've come to is that, since he can't fix it, I'm not going to include him in the,
Lesson learned.
They're typically a good company to work with, but I guess
Right.
the response we got from this issue just made it easier to exclude them. And
Understood.
work with other people.
It does happen, and it's usually a bad batch of asphalt.
I could have got him on a failure of the integrity of the asphalt. And that happened in another place I was at. I ended up having him repave, and it cost him $60,000 to repave the road. This one, there's no integrity difference between, I looked around, it's just an aesthetic thing.
Yep.
And it reacts with the paint. The paint is water-based, and when you add water to iron, you get rust.
Yeah.
And that's what ends up happening,
Yep.
so.
That's my only question I had.
I wish I could do this and make it go away. I hate it.
Allison, go ahead.
So just, I know this is very, very difficult and unlikely to keep all paving contractors from smoking cigarettes, and that would severely limit our options. But could you suggest that they limit the amount that they smoke while following up on Peter, not that I'm jumping onto all of Peter's comments, but
So I can suggest that they can not smoke
like
while they're paving, but
around other people and.
I mean, I can ask them and tell them that we request that they don't smoke while they're paving on the sidewalk. I mean, but it's a.
Or not throw them.
I don't think I know a paving contractor that doesn't have a crew that smokes. That's one of the issues. But, we can ask them, we can put it in the contract next time that you can't smoke while you're paving.
You can try, except for, the asphalt, hot
I'm
asphalt.
not saying, I know that's not, I'm not in a different world.
I think probably a nice, going over and talking with them when they do the sidewalk to just say, hey, guys, or gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, if there's women that are paving too, I don't want to be.
A designated smoking area for the group to have a cigarette.
Please refrain from smoking as much as you can.
Right.
If you want to smoke, I prefer that you take a break and go somewhere else and smoke.
Right.
I have a last question for you, Dave, if I may. So I know there's like a million different ways of resurfacing roads, and I'm just curious if we're looking into environmental friendly or more permeable surfaces, and if it's something that you could think about asking for bids just so that we know the cost of putting surfacing that will drain water or I know there are different ways to do this, because I have no idea if it doubles the cost per 1,000 feet or whatever. I think it would be interesting just for the education of the public to know that the choices we make in terms of the aggregates we use or the material we use have an impact on the climate, and that if we want to address this, it's going to cost us X amount more. So just as an information, I think I would value it personally.
So we're trying to redo Pearl Street, and we have bids, and one of the first ideas was to use permeable pavement on Pearl Street.
You have to do it when you're completely rebuilding the road, not when.
Yeah.
And because you got to do work on the sub base, and you got to put drainage in, and there's a lot of different things that happen. Part of the issue is when you have a lot of trees and canopy, you have organics, and the organics will clog the pores of the permeable pavement. The permeable pavement is much more expensive to put down, and it's specialized by just a few people and a few plants that can do it. So, there's specific situations where we're going to be able to do that, like an open parking lot maybe, but when you get into a canopy, or a road under a canopy, you prematurely age the permeability of the pavement, and then it fails, and then basically you have the road that, just like it was before. It's not permeable anymore, and you pay twice as much for it.
Interesting.
Just underneath, I think they said there was a lot of clay on Pearl Street,
Right.
somebody said.
Just that is interesting to me, because
So you don't, like,
now I
what
understand
Alice
much
is talking about is, if you don't have a good place for water to drain to,
yeah,
you're
defeats the
creating more
purpose.
of a problem.
Right,
So
it
we're
is.
always looking at those things on every paving project,
Right.
and I really want to incorporate those things where we can. And it's the first thing that comes to my mind when I look, it's the first question I ask, is this
Yeah.
something I can
Yeah.
add,
No, understood. It's been tried around the country, and it's not just the first cost of laying it in the sub-base that makes it work. It's the long-term, how often you're redoing it, and it's been quadruple the cost of asphalt.
The main mall.
Right, the
Yeah.
parking lot of the main mall is a good
Parking lots-
example. It's a
parking lots
success
can
story.
work.
You can read
Parking lots can work
the
real
case
good.
study. We should have probably, in hindsight, this was before I got here, everything was all set in motion, but the parking lot across the street would have been a really good candidate for that.
Yeah.
We weren't in that mode at the time, so.
Next time.
But, they'll be up maybe when you do the public landing.
Good comment. Do I have a?
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Do I have a motion to recommend a bidder?
I make a motion that we approve the bid submitted by
Performance.
Performance for paving the streets.
A second.
For a total of
Performance
500.
paving.
Performance paving, is it the total $589,520, Dave?
The actual contract amount was $267,770. The future work was $321,750. That wasn't incorporated into the total bid price.
So I make a motion that we approve the contracts, the bid submitted by Performance Paving in Owl's Head for an amount of $267,770.
And Stephanie, your second?
Second.
Further discussion?
We don't have to do the future work? That's not part of
No.
it? Okay.
Because we're just disbursing that amount right now.
Correct.
But we know that future work
Correct.
might cost us that.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you, David. Thank you.
You should
very
see the
much.
sidewalk on Washington Street paved in the next couple days.
Great.
Yeah.
It's great news.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. You have a great night.
Allison, let's bring on Patrick for the next one, please. We have one discussion item tonight, which is a presentation. I'll wait a second for Patrick to show up.
Carry forwards, but you can do Patrick first.
Yeah, that's not a good idea.
can do
Let's get him off.
Yeah, that would be nice. to-
Yeah, you're right ahead of this. And there he is.
So we can see Patrick better.
I can see him on my
Sophie
computer.
leaves, turns off the
No,
lights.
that's fine. That's fine. Why isn't he on that screen?
Good evening, everyone.
Yeah, we don't need
Vacation,
to.
Bob.
Okay. Hello, Patrick. Good evening. Thank you for waiting. We appreciate it. We understand we have a presentation from you on the results of a traffic study for the Elm Union Street intersection, better known by us as a stop and go intersection. So without further ado, Patrick, please introduce yourself and let's hear the results of your study.
Sounds great. Good evening, everyone. I'm Patrick Adams. I'm Maine DOT's active transportation planner of Union Street and Route 1. And I got the go-ahead from the two of them to approach our traffic folks to do an analysis of this intersection. Before I go too far, I want to make sure that I point out that I am not an engineer. If you start asking questions, I will not know the answers to them.
Okay.
I know what information was in the report, and I'll do my best to share that with you.
Okay.
I have copies of the final report that was generated in March of 21, as well as this presentation. At one point, I was planning on being there tonight, and I was going to bring those with me. I'm going to drop those in the mail tomorrow and get them sent down to Audra so that she can share them with you in case you have additional questions.
Okay.
But the whole idea behind doing one of these traffic studies is to use the data and information that you currently have about the intersection, including traffic volumes, turning movements, and things like that, as well as putting it in simulators to give us an estimate on what could reasonably be anticipated at that intersection. Oops. So this is an overhead shot of the intersection. Union Street's coming in from the bottom right-hand corner. Elm Street, US Route 1 is that yellow line going from the bottom left to the upper right. You guys all know this. This is Route 1 looking southbound. This is Route 1 looking northbound. And this is looking up Union Street with the stop and go there on the right. What Maine DOT has been long concerned about and feels is probably one of the biggest challenges of this intersection is the stop sign that's facing people who are heading north. It's one of the few instances where the major road, US Route 1, actually yields to a minor roadway, which would be Union Street. Union Street has a much smaller amount of traffic on it compared to Route 1. And there's long been some concerns within Maine DOT about how that impacts traffic flow. So here on the left-hand side, you can see, based upon the counts we have, we estimate that north of the intersection, there's on average over the course of the whole year, over 12,000 vehicles that are north of the intersection. South of the intersection, there's close to closing in on 11,000 vehicles. And then Union Street only has about 4,200. On the right-hand side here, you can see the turning movements. So if you're coming south on Route 1, you'll see this is the estimated peak hour activity. So this is peak hour in the afternoon. You can see that going southbound on 1, approximately 184 vehicles will turn on to Union Street, while 462 will go straight through. Heading north on Route 1, 466 will go straight through, with 53 turning on Union Street. And right here, if you're on Union Street and you decide to go south on 1, we estimate 95 vehicles. And coming off Union Street going north, 204.